Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. All about nutrition from your favorite dietitian. Everything you need to digest in your mind. Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. Making you healthier one bite at a time. With Tony. Woo.
Hello and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. I'm very excited for you to hear this next interview. I have virtually in front of me Hailey Miller. She is a podcast host and content creator and just an overall really well-balanced person who has been through a lot and has a lot of insight about similar things that you're probably going through. So I'm really excited to have her on the podcast. Hailey, welcome.
Hi, Tony. Thanks so much for having me. And thank you for calling me a well-balanced person, because I definitely don't always feel like a well-balanced person in my brain. So I'll take that.
Well, we'll talk more about that in a minute. Before we kind of get into the meat of the conversation, I wanted to just have you introduce yourself to the listeners, to just share who you are, what you do, and most importantly, why you do what you do.
Sure. So I love this question, and I might go a little bit off script here than the typical response. I ask this question to a lot of my guests on my podcast as well. And I'm not sure if you've ever read the book, The Untethered Soul. Have you read it?
No, I have not.
Great book. And I opened up the book to this page one time that says, like, who are you? And I think that there are so many layers to who we are. And so often when we're out or we're socializing with someone new and we ask, oh, who are you? We automatically skip to say what we do in our daily life, what we do for work, because we derive so much value from that. So as I was thinking about this question, I was like, how do I want to explain who I am? So I'm going to test it out a little bit differently. So the way that I think of myself first and foremost is I'm a daughter, I'm a friend, I'm a coworker, and generally just a person trying to find my place in the world every single day. And it's hard. I think that I am thoughtful, I'm sensitive, I'm curious, I'm motivated, I'm incredibly extroverted, but I'm also such a homebody. I think that kindness and compassion are the two things that make the world a better place. And I try to lead every day with doing those things through the work that I do in my job, through my podcast, and through my interactions with other people. There are so many things that I am not good at that I wish I was better at. The first thing is communicating in difficult situations and being more direct about how I feel, less defensive, and like so many of us, wish that I could relax just a little bit easier. I think that curiosity and learning and doing things that you're passionate about is what makes your life feel fulfilled. And what I'm passionate about and what the work that I try to bring out through my podcast and through other work that I do is sharing stories that can help people define what it means to really live well for them. Not what it means to live well in the context of other people's definitions, but really what it means for you. So I do this in my day-to-day job. I work in content marketing, and then more directly through my podcast and the content that I create on Instagram. I got into this field and this, I guess, more holistic approach to wellness when I discovered the Institute for Integrative Nutrition and got my certificate in health coaching and kind of just started on this wellness path from there. So yeah, that was a very long-winded answer, but
I love it. I mean, how many of us need to learn how to be okay to like just relax more and just chillax a little bit more? Like it's real stuff. And, you know, you talked before, like on your podcast and in general, just about like anxiety and mental health. And, you know, anxiety can always make us feel like we need to do something. like we always need to do something. But I was just talking to a client earlier, and I was like, part of this, the anxiety also helps us does do things, right? So it's like, it's what drives us to start a podcast or like to like do a workout or whatever sometimes. And it's not always the worst thing. It can be a good quality in us as well. So I thought that was interesting as you were sharing that.
I agree. I do think that anxiety can be positive if you know how to channel it and be a little bit more gentle with yourself and learn how to tap into the intuition of the anxiety. And am I driven by this anxiety for a positive reason and a positive outcome and because I care about myself? Or am I driven by this anxiety because I'm clenching, I'm holding on, and I'm unwilling to let go of an expectation that I have?
That's some deep work. So tell us a little bit more about kind of like, you seem to be someone who's very honest, very vulnerable, like in your podcast, and you like are not afraid to share your own story as long as other people's stories. Like, and I think, what do you think is you like, I guess my question is, through those experiences, like, was there one experience that allows you to do that, to open up to others, to share? Like, what made you want to start your podcast and kind of lead by example?
That's such a great question. And the answer, I think, is kind of, there's a few folds to the answer. So I can start with the reason why I started the podcast. And to be completely honest, it was a kind of like a self-centered reason, I guess. I had lost a job. A company that I started working for just closed. So I was unemployed for the second time in 2 years. And I felt a little bit lost, and I felt like this creativity that I like to fulfill, I didn't have the space to do that. And I always liked public speaking. When I worked at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, I did a lot of public speaking and just felt so in my element, and felt like that was something that I was just meant to do, was to connect with people in this way. And a friend recommended that I start a podcast, and I was like, sure, I'll start a podcast. Why not? So I just kind of like did it. And that's kind of one thing that I do, is if I get an idea of something I want to do, I just do it. And I don't really care about like it being perfect. There are other ways that my perfectionism is very present, but in that way it's not. So I just did it. And actually the like gifts that the podcast has given me have been so vast and so great. It's been like feeling like stories can really help people, feeling like information is so powerful, and that learning about new things, you get to expand your perspective in this really meaningful way that has every episode I learn something, and I'm challenged to think differently, and it's really special. But when it comes to me personally wanting to share my stories or the ability to be vulnerable, thank you for saying that, because I don't always feel like it's easy for me. It's not easy to share stories all the time, but there's a couple of reasons that I think that it's so important. The first, and I remember the first time that I thought of this was when I was in college, and I felt like there was a little bit of distance between me and some of my friends that I really loved. They were my best friends, but I felt like I couldn't get there. I couldn't get to that connection. And I started sharing more about me, about my family, about the things that scared me, about the way that I felt about myself. And after doing that, I felt like the connections with my friends started to become deeper. And I think that it's through disclosure that we create more meaningful relationships with each other. So that's one reason that I try to share and try to force myself even when it's uncomfortable. And then when it comes to sharing with people on a broader scale that I don't know, that's really scary. But it's actually sometimes less scary than sharing with a friend.
Actually, I was going to say, I disagree. I think for me to, like, my mic is moving everywhere, for me to get on a podcast, and I don't know why it's so much easier for me. It's still scary. It's not easy. I shouldn't say that. It's a little bit easier for me to like talk into a mic
Yeah.
But then like, if I were to like tell a close friend, I'm getting better at it, but I relate to you a lot. Like it is sometimes a lot harder to open up to a close friend. I don't know. I'm curious why actually were that friends that you were really close with, why you did initially feel kind of like you weren't connecting with them. Do you think, were they not sharing their vulnerabilities, or, was it something you think you needed to do personally, or do you think it was like you started first and then they started opening up?
It's a really good question. I'm not sure. I think that it's just true in every relationship that when one person is vulnerable, or you start deepening the relationship, and then the other person is vulnerable and shares something. And being vulnerable can mean so many different things. And I think that it's kind of like a catchphrase right now, like be vulnerable. It's the best thing that you can do. And I do believe that to be true, but being vulnerable can be as simple as like just telling a joke or, trying something new.
Someone might not laugh.
Right. It's like risking. It's like, how do I risk myself? And even though it's so hard, every time you take that risk, whether it's, especially emotional risks, I think you actually feel so much more fulfilled and empowered and confident in yourself, because you're like, oh, wait, if someone doesn't laugh at my joke, I don't care. Like, I don't care if you laugh at my joke because I think my joke is really funny. Yeah. So you start building that confidence. And the one other thing I will add that goes back to the storytelling and sharing more broadly on the podcast, I was listening to Armchair Expert, which is like my favorite podcast on the face of the earth, hosted by Dax Shepard. He's like so evolved and amazing. Edward Norton said, if you want to change someone's life, share your story. And I think that all that we want as humans is to feel connected, to feel like we're not alone, and to feel like we can see ourselves in other people, and to know that what we think and what we see and what we feel, we're not alone. Like everybody feels those things, everybody experiences those things, and that when we feel like we do it together, life just feels a little bit easier.
Yeah, definitely. Especially during a time right now where it's so easily, if you almost like, we need things like this, like podcasts, and for people to speak on social media, to share their stories, because if not, it can be very isolating right now. We're recording this in COVID, and, things are still so unclear. And it's important to know, especially during this dark time, like this is a hard time. This is a really hard time. And so, although what you see on social might appear like everyone has it together, like we all, I'll say it right now, if the listeners need to hear, like I have my moments, but I do them in private. I'm not publicly going to share myself, like feeling like I need a 12-hour nap and like a cry. I might talk about it, but like, I'm not going to be like, hey guys, look at me crying. Like that's just like, just doesn't work, I know it has been such a hard time. And I can share as well that I found myself like curled up on my floor multiple times crying, feeling isolated, feeling alone, feeling scared, and not always being able to identify what it is. Like at the beginning of quarantine back in, I guess it would have been like March or April, like my skin got so bad. It just was so inflamed, and it's finally starting to heal. Like 8 months later, I had a cold sore that like took up my entire here to here. And I just like every day I would like look at myself in the mirror and be like, thank God I don't have to go anywhere today. And then I would just cry. Yeah, no, but it's real. Oh God, it's real. There's real stuff there. I wanted to ask you something, and now my brain just went like blah. I don't know. So we'll
we can come back to it.
It'll come back to me. But I know what I was going to say. So you had mentioned that there was over a 2-year period you were unemployed twice. And I hope you're okay with sharing, but I would love, because we're in a time where unfortunately a lot of people have lost their jobs.
Yeah.
So like, it's such a negative time. It's such a difficult situation to be in. Like, how do you turn that into something positive? Like, how do you get through those moments where it does not feel good to not only not have a job, because it probably plays into, like you were saying, most people identify with, what do you do? Like, who am I? It's what I do. That's who I am. Like, that alone is hard. But then imagine, like, I can't even imagine, like, not having the finances and to do the things that you want to do. So how did you get through those times? And I apologize for my cat meowing in the background for the listener.
That was a really loud meow.
Yeah, he's really loud. They're very talkative cats. They want to be on the Tips with Tony podcast. So
maybe next time. That's such a great question. And I think that so for some context, the first time I was unemployed was a personal decision to leave a job, but it was still very scary because it was the right decision, but I was still unemployed for an unknown amount of time. And then the next time I got a job, and then the business closed 4 months after I started. And then I was 5 months unemployed then. And then I finally got another job. And I had that job for about a year. And then we got investigated by the FBI, like Theranos style. And they ended up closing. And so that was last year.
Wow.
So there have been these multiple stints of not having a job. And I will say with each time I have learned so much. And I think you mentioned this on the podcast episode that you were on of mine, is to learn while you're experiencing something. Mm-hmm. And I wish that I had known that back then, because there's no way around it that being unemployed, having an uncertain future, being worried about your finances is just hard. Mm-hmm. And getting through is what you're looking to do. And there's no really easy way around it. And I think if you want to come out positively on the other side, it's a lot of really hard work that you have to be committed to doing. I think that there are some days that we wake up and we feel better than others, but I think most days we have a choice for how we want to try to approach the world. Mm-hmm. Whether or not that effort turns out the way that we want it to is kind of unknown, but you get a choice to at least try. So for me, I'm a big routine person. So sleeping in until 10 a.m. just because I didn't have a job was not an option for me most days. Mm-hmm. I will say, if you're unemployed right now and you can lay in bed until 10 a.m. and just kind of savor that moment, go for it, do it. But I needed routines, and I needed to identify the things that made me feel good. So the things that make people listening feel good may not be the same things that make me feel good. But for me, it's exercise, it's having a really good cup of coffee in the morning, it's cooking myself really good food, it's getting outside in nature, it's connecting with friends, and it's experiencing things that I feel passionate about. Mm-hmm. Whether that's work or outside of work. They can be the same or they can be different, but I think having interests that you can kind of dive into feels really good. So identify what those things are for yourself and make them a priority. Make doing things that feel good a priority.
Yeah, that's so powerful. So powerful.
The other thing.
Yeah, what else were you
The other thing that worked was meditating. This past time especially, I would meditate for 30 minutes every morning. And I read, what's Gabby Bernstein's Super Attractor? I had not read really any Gabby books before that. It wasn't really my thing, I guess. And I read it. And whether or not it's kind of like placebo effect, some of those things, people may or may not believe in like signs and believing, but truly it helped me develop this like sense of faith that things would work out. Mm-hmm. And I am so lucky that I have experiences that everything always does work out. It doesn't mean that the in-between is easy, but we will always come out on the other side. And if you can find a way to like ground yourself in that kind of faith, I think is just really powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's like kind of all we can do is look for the positive in these, and here's another thing, you will get through it. We always do. We always do. And if you feel like you didn't, it's because it's not over yet.
Right. And there's always one of the things that she says in the book is like, if things don't work out, just remember that something better is coming. Something better is coming. Mm-hmm. And life isn't linear. Life is an evolution, and there are ups and downs and ebbs and flows. Some of the ups are really up and some of the downs are really down. And I think the more we can loosen our attachment to some of those ups and downs and stay more content and peaceful, the better. Obviously, we should celebrate when things go really well, and we should feel sad or angry or upset when things aren't good. But if we can find ways to level set ourselves most of the time, I think we have a better experience. Yeah. And I also think that just like there's always something to be grateful for. I do say that with like, there are people really struggling out there that I want to recognize that I come from a place of like very great privilege to have so many things to be grateful for. But I think probably for most of the people listening to your show, there may be one small thing, like maybe like I'm wearing my slippers right now and like my foot feels so cozy in my slipper. And maybe that's something that I feel grateful for, and starting to pay attention to those little things.
Yeah. Or even the fact that you have the ability to listen to, and I feel grateful for like people that I listen to their podcasts. And I do plan on working with certain people. I hope in the future I can work with people like Jay Shetty. Yeah. Shetty. Like it'd be amazing. Or like, anyways, the point is that like to be grateful that you can actually have the power to learn from people that are not in your immediate circle. Meaning like we have access to people like Gabby Bernstein, where you can listen to her book. You don't never have to work with her. You never have to be coached by her. You just read her book, and now you have a new perspective. You learn something. And that I think is powerful and something to be grateful for. There's so many things to like, and one thing I will say when it comes to like expressing gratitude is say why. Because I used to get really caught up in just like, I'm grateful for my bed. I'm grateful for my clients. I'm grateful for my boyfriend. I'm grateful for my sister, whatever it is. But it can become like, I feel like it comes like kind of like routine. And then you don't, it's like, but why are you grateful for them? Or why are you grateful for, these slippers? Because they make me feel cozy, and they make me like, it's cool. I love to be able to I take my shoes off after a long day, and it means I did a good job or something, like, I don't know. I always find like there's also maybe why someone might be resistant to expressing gratitude is they don't realize like the layers in which it can go. And the deeper you go with it, the more that I feel like it becomes like a part of you. You like genuinely become happier. Whereas like if you kind of just like say it, it's like kind of just fluff, kind of like affirmations.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to start doing that. I've heard, who did I hear talking about that? Oh, on the Skinny Confidential, Lauren Everett's talked about like going deeper into the gratitude. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I really should start doing that, because I think that it also helps you start to connect with your emotions a little bit more, which is very, very difficult.
Yeah. Well, you said something in the very beginning when you were introducing yourself about how you struggle with being able to express how you feel. And that is 100% like me. That is 100% me. I feel like a moron sometimes. I'm not going to lie. When people are like, well, how does that make you feel? I'm like,
What do you mean feel?
Like I'm working on it, but yeah, it's hard because if we're not even used to being in touch with our feelings, how could we even then express our feelings?
Yeah. Right? And then say them out loud, which is that whole vulnerability piece.
Yeah. So, oh God. So, oh my God, this is such good stuff. So a couple of things we were talking about offline is you mentioned about how being kind is a superpower. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. I just think that the world is a really messy, scary place. And I think that being kind to other people, being kind to the planet, being kind to yourself has benefits that just extend so far beyond ourselves and beyond our circle. And I just think if we could like send like kindness vibrations throughout the world, it would be a better place. I do think that sometimes it's hard to be kind.
Yeah.
I sometimes find it hard to be kind. I don't want to, but I know how it feels when someone is kind to me and what it feels to experience kindness and warmth and the ability to give that feeling to someone else. I just think that if we could all do that, the world would be a better place. And I know that's very simple, but I think that like there's elements of like greed and dishonesty that can just be, I don't know, not fixed by kindness, but just for recognizing that we're all human and we're all the same.
Yeah. And just some are more complicated than others.
Yeah, some humans are more complicated than others. I may be one of those complicated humans if you asked certain people.
No. I'm thinking more of the people that like are kind of closed off to personal development. You know, it's hard. It's hard to even be kind to certain people.
It is hard. And I think that anyone who's closed off to personal development, I get it. Like it's hard because when you start reading those books or learning or listening to podcasts or start exploring, you bump up against some of the truths about yourself that you maybe didn't want to see. And that's really hard work. And it's way easier to not do it and to keep the status quo and maintain like an ignorance is bliss sort of mindset. So I get it. But if anyone's listening is resistant, it does feel way better on the other side once you get there.
Yeah, for sure. Oh God, this is so good. So one more question and then we'll kind of wrap it up. You mentioned that like being curious is like the best gift you can give yourself. Like why is that the best gift that you can give yourself? And like how would even someone kind of start? So we've talked a lot about vulnerability and curiosity and, you know, being introspective. How does someone begin to do something like that? And why is it important?
I love this question. So I think that we can live our lives through the lens that we currently have. And it could be a great life. We can do the things we always do. We can see the things we always see. We can think the things we always think. It's great. But when we start getting curious and start asking why, we start to develop a greater understanding of the world and what's happening in it and what's happening in ourselves. And I think that through that curiosity and through learning new things, you get to expand your perspective. You get to connect with other people and you just get to say, hey, I never thought about it that way. That's pretty cool. And the idea of curiosity to me is just so expansive. And I think that it is just a gift that you can give yourself to be curious, to learn new things, to listen to a new podcast. You don't have to agree. That's what I say on my podcast all the time. I hope that you listen and I hope that you disagree because it means you have an opinion. It means that you're curious. It means that you're open to learning. And if we were all the same and we all agreed, life would be really, really boring. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it absolutely did. I think that's so true and so powerful. So how would someone go connect with you, ask you questions, and listen to your podcast?
It's a great question. Did you still want me to share how someone could be curious?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Sorry. I just wanted to make sure that I finished your question.
Yes.
So I think that being curious is just ask yourself what you're interested in. So go on a website. Say you're interested in health, for example. I'm going to use that because it's the fastest example that will come to my mind. You're interested in health. Go visit the Mind Body Green website. Scan the articles. See one that stands out to you and start reading it. Think about something that you liked to do when you were a kid. That's kind of how I started getting more curious. I was like, what did I like to do when I was a kid? And I was an interesting little one. I was very curious, but I loved cooking. And so when I graduated college, I was living in Boston. I started cooking. And then I remembered how much I loved writing. And when I was in high school, I was such a writer and I, was on all these like writing contests and stuff like that. So I was like, oh, I'm going to start like a cooking blog. I was like, okay. So I started exploring that. And then I was like, I'm going to start running again because I can't afford the gym. So I started running and then I realized that I was like a pretty good runner. So I got into running and I started training for like marathons and stuff like that. And then I was like, wow, what I eat really affects how I feel. So then I started exploring nutrition and food, which then led me to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. And so it's just like taking that one little question in your head that sparks something. Listen to yourself when it says, go for a walk, go try this. When something piques your interest, explore that and then do more of it until you don't like it. And if you don't like it, find something new.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so true because you don't know until you try. And I think we as humans have a lot of thoughts and a lot of things that kind of come up. And I think that for the most part, they're just thoughts, but sometimes like we do need to listen to them. Like there are things that if you keep thinking about this one thing over and over again, then that's definitely worth exploring. That's definitely worth trying out.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just, it doesn't keep popping up for no reason.
Totally. Your body and your mind send you signs all the time. And I always say, try to listen to the whispers before it starts yelling at you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good quote. Good quote. Awesome.
And the last thing you just asked me was, how can people get in touch?
Yes.
Okay. First, definitely listen to the podcast, and the episode with you is out. It's out right now, which I don't know when this episode is going to launch. This is going to come out in 2 weeks. So you guys will hear this. This will be out in December 1st, whatever that Wednesday is. After Thanksgiving.
Maybe before then. Yeah.
Perfect. So it'll be like 3 episodes back. The podcast is called How Will Live. Will has an apostrophe. So it's WE''LL. And you can follow me on Instagram at The Hailey Daily. And my name is HAILEY. And if you want to visit my website, it's hailey-miller.com. It's currently getting a makeover. So I'm hoping in the next couple months, it'll be up and running in a whole beautiful new theme.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Guys, definitely go follow Hailey. Listen to her podcast. It's awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Hailey. I really appreciate your insight and your time. If you're not already subscribed to the Tips with Tony podcast, definitely hit that subscribe button. I am Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.